There are an estimated 285 million registered vehicles on the road in the United States, combining for more than 3 trillion miles of travel each year. On average, these vehicles will last around 12 or 13 years, requiring a bunch of repairs and new parts along the way, meaning there is always a strong demand for aftermarket auto parts. Over the past, century, I would say, smaller local retailers have slowly been replaced by national chains. Napa and Advance Auto Parts are examples of companies that have opened stores across the United States and even in other countries. However, I think you will agree that the two that stand out above all the others are O'Reilly and AutoZone. By most measures, they are the biggest, most well-known, and most successful. On top of that, you have to admit that these have two of the catchiest jingles ever created. I mean, I cannot even drive past an O'Reilly's without hearing that song in my head. And the same goes for AutoZone. Trust me, you are going to be singing those for the rest of the day now. The two jingles were created within a few years of each other in the late 90s/early 2000s and serve as just one example of how they have been competitive with each other. So for this video, I think it would be fitting to compare these two companies in 5 key categories, starting off with family beginnings. I think it's an interesting comparison because even though they both started out as a family business, it was in very different ways. O'Reilly, I would say, was much more traditional, with O'Reilly being the name of the family that started it. In 1957, Charles O'Reilly and his son, who went by the name Chub O'Reilly, who had both worked at the same auto supply company for the past 25 years, quit their jobs to start their own auto supply company nearby in Springfield, Missouri. Their experience and connections within the industry helped them generate $700,000 in sales within the first year, which, according to this inflation calculator, is the equivalent of around $8 million today. Over the next 25 years, the company saw slow but steady growth, opening dozens of stores throughout Missouri. By the 1980s, Chubb had 4 children who were all leaders within the company. In 1995, Chub O'Reilly was replaced by David O'Reilly as president, but remained on the board of directors, while most other key executive roles were filled by other members of the family. In 2005, Chubb passed away at 92 years old, coincidentally only 3 months after David retired as president and was replaced by 2 people from outside the family for the first time ever. It is easy to get lost in the details here, but the ownership and the leadership has slowly transitioned away from the O'Reilly family. Now, AutoZone was actually started 22 years after O'Reilly in 1979 by Pitt Hyde as part of his family's already existing wholesale business called Malone and Hyde. It started out as one of many attempts to expand that business into specialty retail. Before the auto parts store, he had also opened a drugstore and a sporting goods store, but obviously the auto parts store he opened in Forest City, Arkansas quickly proved to be the most promising. I also want to mention here that AutoZone was originally called Auto Shack until the name was changed following a lawsuit by Radio Shack in the 1980s. And then later on, in the 1990s, Radio Shack was unsuccessfully sued by AutoZone because they had a section of their store with chargers and batteries and stuff that they called Power Zone. So there was kind of an unexpected rivalry going on between those two. Anyway, in 1986, to go along with that name change, AutoZone was separated from Malone and Hyde into its own separate company that continued to be operated by Pitt Hyde for the next decade. In 1997, he stepped down from his CEO position and sold most of his ownership in the company. So even though neither one is really a family company today, they were when they started out and first established their identity and position within the market. And that is going to lead me right into the next category of comparison that I'm going to call emphasis. O'Reilly was started by 2 people who knew a lot about auto parts, whereas AutoZone was started by someone who knew very little about auto parts, but a lot about retail. And to this day, so many years later, that is still reflected in the value that they bring to the customers. From the beginning, O'Reilly has emphasized knowledgeable employees and a wide selection of products, currently over 150,000 stock keeping units, many of which they say are hard to find items that are not typically stocked by other auto auto parts retailers. By the way, I recommend reading AutoZone's annual report from the year 2000 because they actually use the phrase "good for them" when referring to competitors like O'Reilly that emphasize larger inventories. O'Reilly has a reputation for promoting from within the company, going so far as to call it the key ingredient in their secret sauce. They say that the vast majority of their senior district and store managers have been promoted from within the company, helping to ensure stronger availability of products and a helpful experience when customers come in to buy those products. Now, AutoZone, as you might expect, given the founder's retail background, has focused much more on the store itself. Historically, they have tried to separate themselves from the others by providing lower prices, partially through Duralast, their most popular private label brand dating back to the 1980s, and a cleaner, more organized store experience. We have to remember here that back when they started out, auto parts stores were known to be a little scattered and dirty. I mean, some of their biggest competition was literally coming from junkyards. And these different approaches to standing out by each company have been a factor in attracting different customers. O'Reilly has tried to maintain an equal balance of customers that are working on their own cars and people who are working on other people's cars professionally, whereas AutoZone has leaned much further toward customers who work on their own cars. However, starting in the 1990s, they have been doing more and more to attract professional customers, like building a system of hub locations so they can supply more products and identifying it as one of their biggest potential growth areas. They believe they can eventually grow to 10,000 locations in the United States, almost 3,500 more than they currently have, because there is so much more room to grow within that market. I don't know about you, but to me, it already feels like there are a lot of AutoZones around, so it is wild to think that they're only 65% of the way to where they want to be. Overall, I would say that these two stores are more similar today than they have ever been before. So for anybody who has been a customer at either store, please share what you believe to be the biggest differences between them and how that has changed over the years. My next comparison is going to be the size of the two companies, but before anything else, I want to emphasize just how successful they both have been. These are Fortune 500 companies that are recognizable to almost anybody in the United States, whether or not you own a car. Impressively, neither company has ever reported a loss, with net income increasing almost every year for as long as it has been reported. It is a resilient business, because consider, even when the economy is slow and people do not have much money to spend, well, that just means that they are more likely to fix their old car instead of buying a new one. AutoZone had its initial public offering in 1991, followed by O'Reilly's initial offering in 1993, meaning the two companies joined the stock market within 2 years of each other, and almost anybody who was invested in either one of them at any point has likely made a lot of money. Seriously, these have been two of the best performing stocks on the market over that time. AutoZone has gone up 58,000%, reaching $70 billion in value, while O'Reilly, believe it or not, has performed even better. They have increased 65,000% to an almost $90 billion valuation. Even though O'Reilly had a 22-year head start, they were still just a regional chain in Missouri when AutoZone, or I guess Auto Shack at the time, opened its first store. And because part of AutoZone/Auto Shack's business plan was to offer lower prices made possible through economies of scale, they were really aggressive in opening new stores, reaching 500 of them within the first decade. In fact, they opened their 500th store the same year O'Reilly opened their 100th store. But then, in the following decades, O'Reilly became the more aggressive of the two, to a point where they have almost caught up to AutoZone in terms of sales and number of locations. To go along with this size comparison, I also want to look at the reach of these companies, because even though AutoZone has about 1,000 more stores overall, most of that difference is made up of stores in other countries. Personally, I would not really consider either one of them to be a global brand, but AutoZone is undeniably closer to it. They opened their first international location in Mexico in 1998 and have since opened almost 800 more of them, while O'Reilly opened their first international location in Mexico over 20 years later and still operate fewer than 100 of them in that country. And then aside from Mexico, O'Reilly expanded into Canada, logically, at the end of 2023 before AutoZone, but AutoZone has been operating in Brazil since 2012. Again, overall international operations are still a comparatively insignificant part of these companies, but AutoZone has established more of a foundation outside of the United States. Finally, going back to the list, I want to take a look at their methods of growth over the years, pointing out that O'Reilly has been much more more reliant on acquiring competitors compared to AutoZone. Remember, both businesses started out in a similar part of the country, just a few hundred miles away from each other, and when the time came to expand into new areas of the country, O'Reilly was much more likely to do it through a major acquisition. They would buy a bunch of stores in the area and then rebrand them under the O'Reilly name. A couple of the more notable ones would be in 1998. They almost doubled in size when they acquired High-Low Auto Supply for $48 million, adding 182 stores in Texas, Louisiana, and California. Then, 10 years later, they almost doubled in size again when they spent around $1 billion to acquire over 1,300 stores under various names across 12 different states. As far as I can tell, the most comparable acquisition made by AutoZone was in 1998, the same year as that first one from O'Reilly, when they bought Chief Auto Parts in a $280 million deal. They obtained 560 stores that were mostly in California, quickly giving them a strong presence in a new part of the country. To be clear, they have both made multiple acquisitions on the way to becoming as big as they are, but O'Reilly has been more reliant on it, while AutoZone has been more likely to open original locations. My guess is that a lot of the people watching this probably have an O'Reilly Auto Parts in their town that used to be some other kind of auto parts store, and that might be the case for the AutoZone in your town as well. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about O'Reilly compared to AutoZone? Are they becoming more like each other as time progresses, or are they still noticeably different? When you need an auto part, or maybe one of the other services, like oil recycling or battery replacement, which store do you prefer to visit? As a side note, I also wanted to include a little bit more about those other chains in this video, but there was already so much happening with these that I figured it would be smart to keep it simple. So any other thoughts you have about O'Reilly or AutoZone or any of the others, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Auto Parts. Thank you for watching.